So the title, as you can see, is The Language of Money in Aboriginal Australia. And for those of you who looked at the abstract, you'll see that this is a bit of a theme of mine, the language of X in Aboriginal Australia. So the language of horse in Aboriginal Australia was one I did about 25 years ago. And I've done the language of Christianity at some talk where David was present, because basically the idea is that Aboriginal languages have got to adapt in some way or other to foreign, in inverted commas, concepts. Money is something I hadn't looked at and wondered for my own sake what might be happening. So Stuart, who was giving us a great talk before lunch, talked about these online dictionaries. In deference to where I am, I figured I'd start with Alyara, not only because it's readily available online, but also because it's got a really nice amount of detail, whereas what we'll see is that some of the other compilations of lexical material are pretty light on. So starting off, you'll see that there's a term for $1 coin, literally lots of kangaroos. I think it's 5 on the coin if you're lucky enough to have one in your pocket. So the second entry, and I'm purposely not reading these out given the company I'm in and knowing practically nothing about Arandic languages, but you'll see a kind of equation that's fairly common across Aboriginal Australia between stone, hill, rock, mountain and money, particularly coin money. So stones are equated with coins, and then sometimes there's an extension of that. And you'll see other extensions of the basic stone word to hailstone and even to large and round. The next entry towards the bottom is green or greenish, and the top line indicates that it gets applied to a $100 note. And then we have a gloss there, like smoke. So why would like smoke be green? And if you look at the actual note, there's an example of it. I considered bringing a $100 bill along with me and waving it around, but figured people at the back of the room probably wouldn't be able to see it anyway. So why would you call a bill like that like smoke? Well, fortunately, there was a time when I was renting a flat in inner city Sydney, and my German visitor would give me one of these $100 notes, and the $100 note looked a bit like this. Unfortunately, the colouring is misleading. It looks fairly blue, but if you actually remember the originals that were around from 84 to 1996, they're actually quite grey, a bit like smoke, I would have thought. So I'm assuming that in Alyara that's what people were picking up on. And I'll just have a brief interlude because I figured at this time of a talk people are still coming to grips with things. This is another $100 bill with Alf, what's his name, featured, some Lamingtons on the right, and a few other odds and ends. Other attempts to modify Australian currency include Lara Bingle as the centrepiece, and is it Nicky Winmar on the right, with the famous pointing to his skin at a match. And you'll notice the, is it the holograph? Anyway, the bit that's relatively transparent on the left is a prawn, which gets reiterated in the Warney $50 bill. So hopefully one of these days we'll have linguists maybe as the centrepiece of a $50 or preferably a $100 note, because we're worth it. Getting back to something serious, the point is that there's a kind of lag between when particular terms are applied to currency, like the like smoke version in Alyara, which I'm guessing goes back to the $100 bills of 84 to 96, and the term silver, which gets used in Australian English to refer to 10-cent 20-cent and 50-cent coins. But it's actually been a long time since silver currency had a lot of silver in it. So from 1910 to 1944, the bulk of the shilling was in silver. By 46 to 1963, it had dropped down to 50%, and the 10-cent coin has no silver in it whatsoever. And ditto for some of the other coins that are around. Turning to Multilingual, which is the one language of the lot, I guess, that I'm really familiar with, the equation between rock, stone, hill and coin is robust, so Puzey. There's then an equation which will keep coming up from time to time between paper and paper money. So that's Wik, and to be more specific, there's Wik-Mungkan for red paper money. That's a $20 bill, and I meant to refer to it on the way through, but back in Alyawara, the term red was used as a kind of synonym, if you like, for half-caste, and that's indeed the same kind of vision, if you like, that's produced in Multilingual. And one of the things that people will sometimes say is the coins that are white, that's what we're referring to as silver, whereas when we had brown coins, like the 1 cent and 2 cent coins, they were called something else. Turning now to a language from the top end, Burrata, you'll see rupiah for money, and it's given there as saying from Hindustani and Macassan rupiah, and then there are a whole lot of rupiah compounds. But basically the idea is that the Macassan traders who came from southern Sulawesi to parts of northern Australia for quite a long time introduced the term money into, well, a term for money into Australian Aboriginal languages. So you'll detect a theme as we look at some other languages as we go through. Bilinara, which Stuart mentioned before lunch, has the stone, rock and money version, and not just one word, bamara, but womara as well. And it's unclear to me, for instance, why would you have two words for rock or stone in a particular language? And the bottom entry, Billy, for rock or stone, is said to have synonyms of bamar and womara, but no indication that it applies to money. So some of the stone words in particular languages will apply to coin money and some won't. And I'm not quite sure how systematic that might be. Dinner recurs with the term for rupiah, put there as an Austronesian loan, and then some compounds involving rupiah as well. We then have the barki for stone, mountain, coin and so on, and a couple of other words as well. So these are all drawn from the AUSL online website of dictionaries. Gurinji has milli for book paper, government forms, playing card and money, so presumably that's just paper money, and then has a couple of terms for stone equals money or rock equals money and so on. What's a bit different about Gurinji is that it has a term for check or a large amount of money. I plan at some stage to catch up with people who know about Gurinji and find out, well, this tirja, if that's how you say it, is there an etymology for that, or is it just totally random? Yawadja has rupiah again for money, and it doesn't, in this instance, give any indication of the source of the term. We'll find that various dictionaries propose different sources for rupiah. So far, I think we've had, what was it? Macassan and Hindustani, and this one's saying Austronesian. Well, no, the one before was saying Austronesian. In Creole, we've got quite a range of terms a simple borrowing from English, money or coin, and then the stone money equation, Manulga. Again, I'd be interested to figure out what's the etymology of Manulga, or does it mean something else in the language? Mail, or mel, is mail or money received by cheque that normally arrives in the mail, that one being one way that people acquire money. And then Nuga, another of these mystery terms where I'll be asking a Creolist at some stage, well, what the hell is Nuga when it's at home? So one thing about this particular task of looking at the language of money in Aboriginal Australia is that it throws up a lot more questions than I'm able to answer at the moment. Moving west, we get to Maung, where the term is rupiah without any particular etymology. And then for Latakia, we've simply got a question mark 0. In other words, the most extensive published source on Latakia is from Arthur Capel, based on fieldwork done in the 1940s, but it doesn't really have, well, I did a search on the readable version from Pacific Linguistics, but it didn't indicate anything for money. But I would be very surprised if the Latakia, who were landed on, I imagine, by the Macassans, or at least were in contact with people who would have used the rupiah money term coming from whichever source it might have been, such as Tiwi. So as we go from northeast Arnhem Land, if you like, the supposed homeland of rupiah coming from the so-called Macassans, and we start heading west, we've had languages like Ginang and Barada and Maung and eventually Tiwi. It would be surprising if Latakia, who would have needed to have a term for money, didn't actually acquire that term as well. You'll see that about 2/3 of the way down under the coins term, that there's a synonym, Wurupia, where Tiwi is one of these nominal classifying languages. So typically a word will have some kind of prefix to indicate its nominal classification, but rupiah is basically buried inside. Tiwi is a bit unusual in having a whole stack of different terms. So there's a term bigger for I, which then can be extended to bullet, matchstick and coins. I don't necessarily get matchstick so readily, except maybe the red tip or something, but otherwise it doesn't look all that I-ish to me. There are then some equations between a term for mussel shell and money. And in terms of trying to figure out the distribution of some of these equations, I would be surprised if a language like Aliaura would use mussel shells as one of the potential equations with money. Aren't a lot of mussel shells in Central Australia, I'm assuming, but I could be wrong. Okay, well, the idea is to go to Yandrawanta or whatever and find out whether there's something in there. I think there's a person who's got a dictionary in his kit bag, so I'll be interested to find out. Indeed, this talk, along with many others, is my attempt to extract information for my own value from members of the audience. I mean, I could laboriously telephone or email everyone, but you can just cough up what you can at question time. Walmajari is a real standout in terms of well, let's say the contrast between an online dictionary and another version, in this case the printed version, where sometimes the print version is a lot better because what Ellis Richards and Joyce Hudson say explicitly about pama for stone, rock or hill and money is that it was used to refer to coins, then extended to paper money as well. So here we've got an explicit account of where the term, where it's stone equals coin and therefore money, Do we know in many of these languages whether the term for stone equals coin then extends to paper money as well? Only one majority spills the beans on that. For Multilingual, it's pretty straightforward. There's a big difference between rocks and paper bark, so you should be able to figure out which one is which, and that's what they do. Walbury, familiar story, stones equals coins. Purely, stone equals money, so does that mean it refers to paper money as well? Don't know, but there are some Walburyologists in the room, so I'm looking forward to getting some further information about that. There are then straight loan words from English like money and some other examples. Interestingly, colour for dollar, where we've got an extension from an English word. Wik-Mungkan, and there is a Wik-Mungkanologist in the room. I've simply extracted a little bit of stuff from the online Wik-Mungkan lexicon. The first term simply gets glossed as money. Don't know whether it's coin money or paper money. Ditto for Wukal. One of the things I spot checked a bit when I was doing this with the online dictionaries was to try and figure out whether there were other terms for stone which didn't have the equation with money, and usually the dictionaries are mute on this particular question. Let's turn now to Macquarie Aboriginal words, and from here you'll probably be thinking, well, is this a systematic account of the lexicons of Australian languages? Well, it is systematic to the extent that on the weekend I just took books off the shelf that happened to be at home and had a look at them. So that includes Macquarie Aboriginal words from about 1992. For Yungambear, which is one of the dialects of the Bundjalung, Margaret Sharp says that Bungu is literally for the bank, so the ubiquitous gu suffix, dative if you like, or purposive in this case, or allative, to or for the bank, maybe benefactive even, whatever. It's the only instance I've come across where a term for money is essentially for the bank. A bit more down to earth is Wiradjuri, where we simply get Wallang equals money, also meaning stone. So that's not unexpected. I happen to have the Handbook of Australian Languages Volume 4 on the shelf at home, so I took that down. Blake on Woiwurrung has nothing to say about money that I could find. Alan Dench uses the term manja, which I believe means stone in some western desert varieties, but this one happens to be Bunjima. Elizabeth Patz on Yapugai does again the equation between Walba equals money, stone, pebble and so on. Bob Dixon on Mbarbaram has nothing to say on money, but it's a fairly short account of Mbarbaram, so there may well have been something. On Tuesday, the IATSIS library opened up again, so I was able to go in and have a look at some things that weren't at home, and that included the Handbook of Australian Languages Volume 1. So John Haviland on Guguyimidjir had the familiar stone money equation, and Wumbulgun seems to be something like having ashes, but I'm not dead sure what the gun suffix is on that. So why would having ashes mean money? Well, to the extent that coins can be regarded as relatively grey, I'm wondering whether that's the account for that. Barry Blake on Pita Pita has a couple of terms for money, but there's no particular etymology of it. What's that? It's what? Stone. Oh, it means stone, right. Okay. I must confess I didn't put the retroflex stop under the T in triple, but I figured hopefully people let me get away with it. In fact, there was a different version where I did alter the orthography, but anyway, stone. So Francis Morpheon Japur in HAL 3 has a couple of terms. Rupiah for money, simply described as loan, but loan from where? Well, we kind of know. And this other term, doi, where there's no particular indication at all.
Might be Dutch.
Might be Dutch. Oh, really? Okay. All right. There's more to be figured out. Terry Crowley on Urathi has the money stone equation, and I modified the orthography because the NH was in the original N with the toothy diacritic underneath it. In haste of putting this together, I thought I won't try and pull up a phonetic font and dazzle people, if that's what it would be. The DH is an EV in the original, so it's basically the that you find in words like that. Urathi being one of the relatively few languages with a, you know, along with Muripata, of course. HAL 5 has Rumsey on Bunaba, where there's the stone money equation once again. Graham Mackay on Ndjepana, not surprisingly, has the Rupiah bizzo going along. Now, the story about Rupiah, back about 40 years ago when I first started getting into the so-called Macassans, published an article in 1981 with Jim Murray. The received wisdom was that the Macassans sort of landed on northeast Arnhem Land and potted around there for maybe a couple of hundred years before they were kicked out in 1911 by the sort of White Australia policy. But I came back to that about 35 years later when they had a symposium at ANU on basically, well, where we're up to on Macassans. And so I revisited this stuff, but the archaeology particularly had moved on, so that whereas in 1979 we could say, well, definitely we've got some languages like Japur or whatever with Rupiah and variants of that kind. By 5 years ago, the geographical spread was a lot greater, going perhaps as far as the Gulf of Carpentaria up to the Queensland border and heading west at least to the Kimberleys and possibly to the Pilbara, which would mean that arguably you might start looking for Rupiah lookalikes for money in a vast array of languages. The time depth also changed considerably. I think Peter might remember this, that Campbell McKnight was saying 17th century or possibly 18th. Okay, roughly, so 17th century. Some archaeological work from Groote Eylandt and E. Clark particularly pushes the date back for Macassan contact to at least as early as the 14th century, which means that it's a bloody long time compared to any other casual visitors coming in. And if people have been around for that long and you are greeted with an unfamiliar substance, then you might well adopt a term. Margaret Sharp has done a trilingual dictionary, which I've put a note down the bottom. Alawa is in bold, otherwise terms are in Creole and English. You can probably figure out the head word, money. Coin is in standard English. The line below has money, a simple loan word from English. What's a bit more surprising is altar, which apparently is altar, which has various extensions, including a sort of flat surface, which arguably, I guess, a coin could be considered as having. The other, paper money idea is taken up by paperback. And then there's this term doa, which apparently refers to door and then gets extended to coin money, as far as I can tell. Another outlier is Naranga, where the term gunya is given as money, no etymology given whatsoever. I'm blowed if I know where that term might have come from. And here are a few sundries where the Lexical dictionary of about 20 years ago probably has nothing. There's no English finder list, and I was looking at a hard copy. These, again, comes off the shelf at home. Fortunately, Ash, Jacon and Lissaran, and Amanda's in the audience, so she can answer any questions that I might have, has a term for money, bungle, but no etymology, of course, and mayama, with a note that mayama is stone and money, and it's a rare word compared to some others. There is a term for paper, but that doesn't seem to equate to paperback and therefore to paper money. Another Lissaran appearance is for the Dictionary of Dutton, where we get a couple of terms, money from English, M-A-N-I, and this equation between grey and money for coin turning up again. The Cook Tayori Dictionary, again, is one of these things where there was no English finder list, so I wasn't going to work my way through 200 pages laboriously, hoping that I'd happen to land on a term for money. Lynette Oates on Mudawari simply has an equivalence. So I've already foreshadowed this business of the distribution of rupiah, and that's a work in progress. Some languages have stone equals money, particularly coins, and some do not. That particular equation doesn't occur. I've already indicated that Walmajeri has an explicit statement that the stone equals money and coins equation has been generalised to paper money. That kind of strikes me as slightly weird, but on reflection it probably isn't. But I also began to wonder about the distribution of paperback. So in Multilingual land, there are masses of paperbacks. I decided I'd look up the distribution of paperbacks and see whether it might be that one could say in Central Australia there aren't many paperbark trees, so you're not going to get paperbark equated with paper equated with money. But there are people in the room who might know. The Wikipedia reference for one of the Melaleuca varieties of paperbark says it's widely distributed in northern parts of Western Australia, the Northern Territory and in Queensland. Does that mean northern parts of the Northern Territory, in which case Centralia gets left out? So at question time, which I'll be asking the questions, a bit different. At question time I might well ask, so are there a lot of paperbarks in Central Australia, or are there none, or whatever? So I'll get to that. Let me turn now, though, to some wider issues. This is a booklet that came out in 1984 teaching about money in tribal Aboriginal communities. It's part of a series that was put out by the Northern Territory Department of Education, Mathematics at Aboriginal Schools project, and this happens to be volume 3. I wouldn't be surprised if lots of people either unaware that Pam Harris and colleagues were involved in this Mathematics at Aboriginal Schools project, and even if they're aware, they might never have actually dipped into these booklets. I only looked at the Pam Harris one on money, but while it looks a bit dated, as we'll see from some extracts in a moment, it goes back about 35 years, a lot of what she has to say rings true for me in modern terms. So one section which is of relevance, and sorry about all the writing, but you can read faster than I can talk. There's a kind of summarisation by Pam on general terms for money that have been borrowed from the contact language through which Aborigines first found out about it. So the English word money has been adopted by many groups, coming out as money or money. The people of North East Arnhem Land, who had contact with the Macassans before the white man used the word rupiah, which comes from the Indonesian word rupee. Now, Indonesian is a bit more general than simply Makassarese or Bulgarese or one of the other linguistic varieties that came over on the boats. Somewhat to my surprise, back in 1979, 1981, when Jim Murray and I were looking at this stuff, we reckoned, look, if you want to find out about distribution of loan words from the so-called Macassans into Aboriginal languages, don't just get a Makassarese dictionary and eyeball it until something pops out. You really need someone who's a qualified Austronesianist and preferably with a really detailed knowledge of Northeast Arnhem Land languages. At the time, we sort of thought that's a bit pie in the sky, but as luck would have it, David Zorc and lost his name, Alan Walker, happened to qualify both as very experienced in Nyungumat, but also qualified Austronesians. They were able to vastly expand the range of loans that had come in from so-called Makassarese or Macassan, simply because Jim Murray and I were able to figure out, well, the people who came over on these boats, they weren't all speaking the same language. Guess what? It was a motley crew and quite multilingual. Therefore, you needed to look for sources from a range of Austronesian languages. Pam mentions coins are often referred to by terms meaning stone or shell, and notes of paper money may be called by names that refer to a kind of paperbark tree or to the bark of any tree. Colour is the basis for classifying coins into two subgroups, which are often called either the black or brown, dark-coloured ones, or the silver or white, light-coloured ones. In many communities, the brown money, 1 cent and 2 cent coins, is regarded as worthless. It is commonly called rubbish money and is thrown away or dropped on the ground as soon as it is received. 20 years ago, I was travelling with an Aboriginal man from New South Wales, by which time I believe 1 and 2 cent coins had already been phased out, a reason being that they figured out the actual value of the metal in the 1 and 2 cent coins far exceeded the face value of the coin. So someone thought maybe it's a good idea to phase this thing out, which is what they did in the end. But my Aboriginal travelling companion was wont to reach into his pocket and throw, as far as I could tell, all his change into the gutter as we're walking along. I'm saying, Tony, what the hell are you doing? His response was not there's rubbish money, and excuse the bad language, he said it's shit. Now, my view is that one of the disadvantages of increasing age is that I'm not as supple as I was 40 years ago, but I'll actually bend over in the street to pick up a 5 cent coin, and I figure that's a good reason for maybe taking up yoga or something, so that my suppleness will allow me to pick up 5 cent coins. Anyway, I don't know these days whether there's an Aboriginal attitude towards coin money where most of it gets chucked away, or at least the smaller denomination ones, maybe the 5 and 10 cents. Size may also be the basis for grouping and naming of coins. At Amorogo, there were smaller coins called small and round, larger coins called big and round. In Wik-Mungkan, apparently, the English terms are usually used, but brown coins may also be referred to as big and small. Silver coins may be distinguished as small, bit big and big. Shape is referred to less often than colour and size, but examples are found in the Agua descriptions and the Maori use of tractor wheel for the 50 cent coin. So tractor wheel for 50-cent coin. I brought one along. I didn't have to pick it up off the floor. It just came out of my pocket. But it's a 12-sided coin, which was a good idea because back in 1966, some of you may remember a round 50-cent coin that was virtually indistinguishable from a 20-cent piece. And people were probably losing out on that a bit. Also, the 50-cent coin went the way of some others. Its metal value was greater than its face value, if you like. So there was more than 50 cents worth of metal in the 50-cent coin, and that's probably not a good way to go. So there's a tractor wheel to give the indication of why people would have chosen tractor wheel, which has got arguably many sides to it. Notes are also, getting back to Pam Harris, notes are described by their colour or some picture on them. The colours are not always used in the way that English-speaking Australians would expect. 3 communities reported that the $5 note is referred to as being red, and one of these communities called the $20 note yellow ochre. Other colour names reported were $1 for rusty, $2 for green, and $20 for red. At least the older people in the room will actually remember $1 and $2 bills. For Golden Island, there are picture descriptions. The $1 had wing or mimi from the mimi figures on it. $2 for wheat. If you cast your mind back to a $2 bill, it has a picture of, is it farrow? Anyway, one of those wheat people with a whole lot of wheat on it. The moustached man, if I was asking questions of the audience, who was the moustached man? Henry Lawson is the answer. $20 for $20 equated with yellow ochre, notwithstanding that to me it looks pretty red, and thus the modern part of the term aptly referred to as red paperbark. And here's a bit of a blurt from Pam Harris about some of the responses that came in. They don't know that a 5-cent coin equals 5 1-cent coins, blah, blah, blah. People having difficulty figuring it all out. Now, this is the part of the Pam Harris paper that I'm not all that happy with. It kind of presents a sort of deficit account of Aboriginal use of or knowledge of the values of coins and notes. In my experience, these days, plenty of Anglo-Australians don't seem to know much about what they're doing, and certainly it's a bit of a shock to my system when at a service encounter someone gets out a calculator to add 9 and 7 together. I've already done it in my head, and that's getting rough down there. I said in the abstract that I'd talk a bit about not just single words, but some issues in discourse. I want to start with something from my own recollection. At Wadier, formerly called Port Keats, in 1986, I witnessed a silent service encounter just being a general term for when you encounter some people for a service. It could be in a bank, a police station, or in this case, a shop. So in my mind's eye, I can see a woman coming up to the cash register, moving a whole lot of stuff from the store along towards where the person at the cash register is waiting. The person at the cash register tots it all up and continues not looking at the customer. The person serving was an Aboriginal woman as well. So they're both not looking at each other. There's a pause, at which point the Aboriginal customer empties a bag, which included notes and coins, onto the counter. The person serving her tots up the amount of money, and there's another pause, and then, after a while, no one's spoken anything at this stage, and nor do they. At that point, the customer goes like this, and some money is slapped into her hand, which she slaps down onto the counter without counting it. and apparently not knowing who it came from as well. She then gets some change given to her, which she shovels into a bag and walks out. So the entire service encounter was done without any words whatsoever. And that, I would suggest, is not all that uncommon. Now, the question, of course, is why, who was the person who slapped the money into a upturned palm? Well, presumably some relative, and it would be someone that was known to that particular woman, and pretty well everyone in the shop would have known who was who, and if there was to be recompense for that generosity in meeting the bill, something would have happened in the future. I want to refer now briefly to a paper by John von Sturmer from 1981 called Talking with Aborigines. This is one of the classic papers in my view, but to my disappointment I keep coming across people who say, no, never heard of it. Well, before you go to bed, make sure you get a copy and read it, because it's got lots of good stuff in it. And one of them has to do with money. I haven't read this paper for a long time, so this is simply from memory. John von Sturmer related a situation where he is with a bunch of Aboriginal companions, and he was asked for some money, and he said, I've got no money. There was an incredulous silence until someone said, we don't believe you. White fellas have always got money. So John von Sturmer, by his own report, then became angry, and having survived some of John von Sturmer's anger, I could assure you it wouldn't have been a pretty sight. He then turned out all his pockets and said, see, I've got no money. At which point various Aboriginal companions said, oh, poor thing, do you want, you can have some money. So they were trying to get money out of him, and when he revealed that he really didn't have any money, they felt sorry for him. So it's a different kind of attitude, I guess, to money. I want to conclude just by saying something about off to the races. So there are various encounters where Aboriginal people are going to need to manipulate money, and in particular horse races, there's a whole series of odds. It's not a good idea just to say, I'll take whatever's in my pocket and plonk it onto any horse that happens to be there. You need to check to see whether it's 2 to 1 on or 100 to 1 or whatever. So there has to be some kind of appreciation of the numbers. In that and various other situations, including playing cards, Aboriginal people have had to accommodate, let's say, to money and to the mathematics that sits behind it. And that's where I'll finish.